China, for many reasons, in some ways it may actually be subsidising your employment. They are our most important trading partner in the world today. Strong relationships with China are vital to Australia's national interest. But when the Australian Security and Intelligence Organisation goes and meets the heads of the major political parties and warns them that they're concerned about Chinese donations and influence, you know something is very wrong. Australia is one of the few democracies around the world that accepts foreign political donations. Now, you saw the Four Corners program on Monday night, I hope, and 7:30 report again last night revealing further names in politics and New South Wales Labor and just how far Chinese money is reaching into the Australian political system. To talk about this, I've asked someone onto the program who's not one of the major political party players. He's Liberal Democrat Senator from New South Wales, David Leyonhjelm. David Leyonhjelm, good morning to you.
Good morning, Steve.
Have you ever been offered or taken any financial support offered by Chinese donors from overseas?
No, not that I know of. The donor side of my party is now a little bit removed from me in order to avoid any suggestion of influence. But as far as I know, we haven't received any foreign donations, Chinese or anybody else.
Would you accept it if it was?
Yes, we would.
Tell me why.
Well, we're a party of principle. Our values, our libertarian values, are what drive us. That's why we're in politics. And the suggestion is that a donor would be able to change that. That would be impossible. So a donor could only give money to the Liberal Democratic Party in the knowledge that we have our principles, we stick to our principles, our policies are what they are. If you like them, then give us money in order for us to promote them. If you don't like them, then don't expect us to change them because they are what they are.
You would have seen the Four Corners program on Monday night and 7:30 last night. There are clear implications that the influence that this substantial amounts of money are bringing into the Australian political scene would appear to have some influence or affect some change.
Yes, I must admit I hadn't realised it was quite as extensive as that show would suggest. I was aware that Chinese donations or donations from Chinese sources had been made to both sides of politics, as a matter of fact. And yes. I do meet Chinese lobbyists from time to time. But
what do they lobby you over, Senator Leyonhjelm?
Mostly just, no particular issue. Mostly just getting to know me and.
So they're relationship building.
Yes, they're relationship building. Yes, they'd like to know. In my opinion, the main thing you get from a donation to a party is access. So being able to ring up and make an appointment and then go and have a talk to somebody who you want to talk to. And I don't require a donation for somebody to make an appointment to see me. It certainly does help if you want to go and see a minister or a shadow minister. And the question then is, well, given the size of the donations and the extent of it, in particular, emanating from one source, as the program last night on 7:30 highlighted, is it going beyond that? Is it going beyond access?
When the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation goes to the directors of the major political parties on the left and the right in Australia and warns them, and their warnings are seemingly ignored, doesn't that raise alarm bells?
Well, look, I have a fair bit of time for ASIO, Duncan Lewis, but my feeling would be he probably doesn't know a great deal about how political parties operate and the process of parties making decisions and policy development that occurs within them. I'd say he probably has never been a member of a political party. You tend to be, not all that successful at applying for jobs with ASIO if you are a member of a political party. So it may be that he's making assumptions about how foreign donations affect the Labor Party in particular, which is the subject of the program, which are not valid.
It wasn't just New South Wales Labor
No.
or federal Labor that were seen, at least on the surface, to have possibly adjusted their public comments about concerns over South China Sea operations.
Yes, that's
It was
right.
a surprise to learn that a key Liberal Party figure, Andrew Robb, was key in involving negotiations over a couple of federal matters, and then after he quit politics the very next day, turns up working for a Chinese firm. That was a surprise to many.
Yes, and it was a surprise to me. I knew Andrew Robb vaguely before he left politics, and I had no idea that he was going to work for a Chinese firm like that. I mean, you have to look at it and say, well, 99% of the time it's all innocent. All they're trying to do is gain access so their voice can be heard. That's a legitimate political expectation.
So donations just get you a seat at the table.
Yeah, well, that I don't see anything sinister in that. Where the only negative aspect to it is where they say, I want you to change your policy. I want you to change government policies such as towards the South China Sea, based on what we've been doing for you.
But it wouldn't happen. That would be crass and blunt. They would merely want an exchange of views so that you understood their position, wouldn't you? In other words, empathy softens policy positions. Once you start to empathise with someone, it actually subconsciously changes your position.
Well, yes, I suppose that's true, except that we do that anyway. We have to, whoever we talk to puts a point of view. I talk to people with a particular point of view that they like to tell me about, every day, all day, every day, pretty much. And whether or not there's money involved, you can't help but be influenced by it. So I don't see anything sinister in that.
Australia is one of the few democracies in the world that accepts foreign political donations. And Andrew Wilkie, whom you know, Tasmanian MPs in the lower house, admittedly, but is a former intelligence analyst, he says that foreign political donations should not be allowed in Australia.
Yes, that's a fairly common view. I'm a member of JSCEM, the Joint Standing Committee on Electoral Matters, and we've actually had an inquiry into this very issue in the last few months. And in fact, the majority report of the committee was that foreign donations should be prohibited. My problem
was that acted upon? Was that committee recommendation acted upon?
No, it's relatively recent, so the government hasn't responded to that recommendation today. Although I think both Malcolm Turnbull and Bill Shorten have said they are in favour of that recommendation. I recommended against it, not because I want to see foreign influence in our politics. I absolutely don't. But it's not as simple as it sounds to say, we're going to ban foreign donations to political parties. What's the definition of foreign, for example? Is it a company, a person? Is it a subsidiary, a local subsidiary of a foreign company?
Now you're sounding like a lawyer, Senator.
Well, when you write law, you have to think like a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, but when you write laws, you have to think about all these contingencies. Who do you mean by a foreigner? Is it an Australian living overseas using a foreign bank account?
The Four Corners program was able to show that one key donor was making these donations and had federal Labor Senator Sam Dastyari allegedly make phone calls to see how his citizenship application was going.
Yes, and I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that either. I mean, we get constituents asking us to help them with immigration issues and citizenship issues all the time.
Do those constituents offer you money at the same time?
No, they don't. No.
Right. Okay. Let me ask you another quick question on this. Here in Queensland, the Indian conglomerate Adani has apparently been donating to politics while seeking to build one of the biggest coal mines in the world here in Queensland. Do we have enough transparency? I'm not suggesting anything's wrong or illegal by that, by the way, but do we have enough transparency over things like this?
My preference is for all donations to be above $1,000 or thereabouts to be publicly disclosed. I've long held that view. My feeling is that the public is grown up enough, wise enough to decide for themselves whether this matters to them. So as long as they know about a donation, whether it's a foreign donation or a domestic donation, if they know that the Labor Party or the Liberal Party or my party, the Liberal Democrats, have accepted a donation from a particular source at the time, so they know about that in time for when they vote. So it's disclosed ahead of the election before they go into the polling booth, in the full knowledge that so-and-so donated to this party that I'm thinking of voting for. And then they can make up their minds, well, do I like that or don't I like that, or do I care? Is it going to change my vote? At the end of the day, that's what democracy is all about. You know, you put your proposition out there and the voters decide, do I care, don't I care, am I going to vote for them or not, as the case may be. And they take into account millions of facts or millions of details, and that could be easily factored in alongside all the other ones. I don't see anything wrong with that, but it does require disclosure.
Do you see any circumstances where foreign political donations should not ever be accepted by a political party? Well, yes. I mean, sometimes we saw in the New South Wales situation with Eddie O'Bean and Ian McDonald, where it wasn't a foreign donation, it was domestic donations, but they were out to feather their own nests, those two guys. And that is already illegal, of course. So donations which are intended to achieve a particular decision by the government which would favour the donor, that's corruption. That is unmistakably corruption. We have to be on our guard against that sort of thing. All right.
But I think that's where you say, okay, well that's going too far. But just getting a seat at the table so you can put your point of view and earbash a politician, we all get earbashed, and if you're going to pay for the privilege, well, good luck to you.
It's ABC Radio Brisbane. My guest is Senator David Leyonhjelm. I'm Steve Austin. Senator David Leyonhjelm, I wanted to ask you to respond to some comments made on this program yesterday by Jim Molan, former Major General, now retired in the Australian military, architect of Australia's border protection policies. He raised the idea of when there are 400 people in Australia on a terrorism watch list and they're not actually being watched, whether or not we have to consider quite repulsive ideas like internment. Let me just play you something briefly that Jim Molan told me yesterday and get you to respond.
I'm suggesting that we take notice of what the Brits are considering, and that is an increase in custodial sentences and internment. So often when we have these terrorist activities, immediately after they're identifying the bodies, they find that these people have been known to police, as they say, or known to the counter-terrorist intelligence organisation. If someone comes to the attention of police for this reason, there's a case to intern this person, to detain this person for a period of time.
Senator Leyonhjelm, you're a Liberal Democrat, very libertarian views. What's your view on something like that?
Yeah, I'm not real keen on that sort of approach.
What's a better one?
We do have preventive detention orders and control orders already in the law in Australia, have had for some years. They're not used very often.
We have a parole system as well, and it doesn't appear to be working too well, according to the Prime Minister.
Yes, well, that's a reasonable point. So let's just discuss parole for a moment, which is a different issue from what Jim Molan was talking about. Mm-hmm. Parole comes under state law, and there is a reasonable argument to be made that people who are serial violent offenders who are being considered for parole, there ought to be some sort of bias against that. In other words, the presumption ought to be no parole. You have to argue your case in order to get parole. That's now pretty much the case with bail. If you're a serial offender, there is a presumption against bail in most of the states, as I understand it. And something similar in the case of serial violent offenders for parole, I think would be a legitimate thing. We do have to consider, of course, that parole is only a period leading up to the end of their sentences. So let's suppose they aren't given parole, but they reach the end of their sentence, they have to be let out anyway, and that does raise the question of whether the sentence is appropriate. I think there's a case to be made for the prosecution appealing against the leniency of sentences in the case of serial violent offenders too, and potentially locking them up a bit longer.
There are 400 concerning people in Australia on terror watch lists, but they're not necessarily being watched. Is internment a solution? Jim Molan says we need to be taking a close look at what the UK is heading towards.
Yeah, no, internment is not a solution. The likelihood is, of course, that it only takes one person to escape that net, and it would, we would lose faith in that whole approach anyway. And inevitably, we would lock up people who were totally innocent, who had no intention of causing harm to anybody else. So the potential for injustice would be high. What we do have already under the Commonwealth law is what we call preventive detention orders. Most of the states, if not all of them, have something similar where they can detain people without trial. It's hardly ever used, and most people find it very unsavoury, and I particularly do. The one that's perhaps a little less unsavoury, although I am wary of it and it needs to be very carefully used, is what are called control orders. That's sort of like being on bail, and the conditions are similar to bail, but you haven't actually been convicted. So it may be you're not allowed to leave your house after dark, or you have to wear an ankle bracelet, you have to report to the police, you're not allowed to approach certain people, that kind of thing. That has been used a few times. The federal police tell me that it has a kind of a salutary effect on the people who are subject to those orders. It makes them modify their behaviour and have a bit of think about it. And if you take into account the fact that most of these people committing terrorist acts are a little bit like we would have called them just criminals years ago. Now they're doing it supposedly for a cause, but they're not very smart. They're kind of lost in that's the kindest word I can think of, lost in a social sense. And a period of a few years, perhaps, where they're subject to these control orders might bring them to their senses. You never know. But if we are going to use kind of intrusive and out of the box type of legal measures, I'd much prefer that kind of approach was taken.
Senator, thanks for your time.
My pleasure.
That's the Liberal Democrat Senator David Leyonhjelm speaking to me about Jim Molan's idea on this program yesterday of internment and foreign political donations in Australia. I'd love to know what you think. 1300 222 612 is the phone number. 1300 222 612. Given what you've heard, what do you think? Give me a call now.